G'day, I'm Peter Fritz. Welcome to Landscape Photography in 3 minutes. This is day 10 out of 21 in this series in July. And today we're going to look at a topic that I think a lot of people try to avoid, and that is taking landscape photos in the middle of the day. And I've got 5 tips for you here. But before we kick off, I just want to say that I take a lot of my landscape photos at times that aren't considered ideal for landscape photography. I rarely get up before dawn. As much as I love being up at dawn, I rarely manage to get my ass out of bed early enough to photograph the dawn, mainly because I'm also a night owl, so it's kind of hard to do both. But the thing is, a lot of the things that we have seen over the years that have excited us and that have enthralled us weren't necessarily experienced at dawn or at dusk. They were experienced at different times of day. And if you're shooting thoughtfully and if you follow a couple of simple tips, I think there's no reason why you can't get spectacular images in the middle of the day. In fact, some of my favorite images up on my wall in my office were shot in the middle of the day. So I've got 5 tips to run through. And the first one is to try using a long lens. The trouble with shooting a large scene in the middle of the day with a wide lens is there are just too many opportunities for harsh lighting or shadows to distract the viewer and make it harder to isolate the intended subject. But by using a long lens and scanning around through a scene and plucking out different elements of that scene and shooting them with a long lens, either blurring at your foreground, blurring at your background, or simply excluding all of the distracting elements within a scene and focusing only on one or two, you can create very bold and powerful images in the middle of the day. The second tip is to look for shape and form. The beauty of shooting this way with a long lens and picking out particular subjects is you can, rather than lamenting the presence of harsh shadows, you can actually zero in on harsh shadows related to a specific subject, whether it's a tree or it's a hillside or it's an element within a scene, and you can use the bold shadows within that scene to create a very powerful image. Also in harsh light, if you're photographing a particularly bright part of a scene and isolating that, and you expose correctly for that bright scene, it throws everything else into dark shadow, and that can be very powerful. That can create a very compelling image, especially if you are focused on shape and form. And that leads me to my third tip, which is to look for interesting shadows. If you are photographing, say, a canyon wall, for example, or you're photographing a tree and there is a harsh shadow cast across the side of the hill, that can be very compelling. That can be very powerful. If you are in a canyon and one side of the canyon is casting a harsh shadow across the canyon floor, or maybe partly up the wall of the opposing canyon wall, that can be very compelling. If you just almost sort of blur your eyes or close one eye so that you're seeing things two-dimensionally and think in terms of shapes, lines, form, dark, light, you can create very, very graphic and very compelling images. Another way to approach this is, and I've done this many times, is to convert your image to black and white. And then you are not distracted by the colors. You're purely then looking at light and shade, form, shape, dark and light, that kind of thing. And it can transform an otherwise unappealing, harshly lit, overly saturated image to one which has compelling lines, beautiful shape, appealing form to it. And it can totally change how you feel about an image. And I've done this a number of times and thought, wow, as a mono image, this is awesome. As a color image, it's kind of crap. And this can also lend itself very well to wider scenes, where I was saying in the beginning, to try honing in on on an element of a subject instead with a long lens. If you are going to shoot wide and the strong light is oversaturating the colors, is drawing your attention to the colors more than the form and the shape and the lines, convert it to mono and see what that does to the image. Boost up the contrast and the clarity if you want to in Photoshop or Lightroom and see what that does. And you can often end up with really amazing images that way. And the last one is kind of similar, is there are filters within Lightroom and Photoshop where you can simulate infrared, where the greens can turn to white and a blue sky becomes almost black. And that can be incredibly dramatic and can look amazing. The other option, of course, is to convert one of your cameras, assuming you have more than one, to an infrared sensor. And then everything you shoot on that camera will be infrared. I would assume that that's a better option than simply using a filter within, post-processing software. But I've recently converted a couple of images to infrared, not converted them to infrared. I've used an infrared preset within Photoshop, Camera Raw, and it makes an otherwise mundane scene of grass and a tree with green leaves on it look really otherworldly and ethereal. So I think I'm going to experiment more with that. Thomas Heaton did a video on this recently where he converted his Fujifilm X-T3, I think it was, to infrared. And he was over the moon about it. And the photos that he got just proved the point. They really looked quite dramatic and beautiful. So I think that's something I'm going to be doing more of. Anyway, hopefully that was useful for you. I've done a couple of videos in the past on shooting in midday. There's one here and there's one here. So have a look at those after this. And if you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.